I've made videos on how to start a book, how to end a book, and after just a little procrastination, I've decided to tackle the middle part and make a video on the do's and don'ts of writing chapters. Let's start off with establishing what a chapter is. They are the breaks within your novel meant to help break it up and help with transitions. Think of it like if your book is a TV show, then each chapter is its own episode. Kind of like what Avatar: The Last Airbender did. Each of their episodes are called chapters, and each season is a book. And that's just reason 3 million on why the show is great and can teach you a lot about great writing. But I won't go on about how much I love Avatar. Maybe someday when I'm ready to make a 3-hour video, but not today. Today, let's talk about chapters. Like I said, each chapter is like a TV episode, and typically each episode is its own self-contained story to some degree. Even in highly serialized series, I'm trying not to say it, the pull is really strong, and that's not what this video is about. Even in those kinds of shows, each episode is somewhat self-contained. You want to go into each chapter with a specific goal in mind, something you want your characters to do or learn, someone for them to meet, a place you want them to end up, something that's going to progress your plot. Your characters don't necessarily need to accomplish their goal, but something of note needs to happen in each chapter. As much fun as a filler beach episode is, you still want a goal in mind for each chapter, even if it's just character development. With that said, you don't want to. It's easy to get bogged down in the chapters. It can be hard deciding what you want to happen in each chapter and hard to make it happen. And sometimes one chapter may lead into another that you never planned for. But you want to be careful. I don't do too much of an outline when I plan my story. It's all basically bullet points or events I want to happen and how the book will end. And it's fine if more bullet points are added, but you don't want to add so many bullet points that there's no possible way to get to the ending that you wanted and that you've set up this entire time that would have given such great payoff. It's fine to pivot while writing. Just remember the main plot. Each chapter is self-contained, but they still need to lead into one another. You can tie up loose ends in any chapter, but until your story is finished, you want to leave some loose ends, and you shouldn't be afraid to add new loose ends with each new chapter.
Oh, loose ends.
A good way to know if you've gotten too bogged down in the chapters is to stop and see if you can take the chapter you're working on and drop it into any random spot in your story. That is something you should be able to do, but ideally you'll have to do a lot of work in other chapters to make that keep from getting confusing. If you don't need to go back and change things in other chapters in order to move another one, then you need to evaluate how that chapter relates back to the main plot. The point of a chapter is that ending it is a good place for your readers to stop and take a break, but you want to give them a reason to pick your story back up again and keep reading. Keep them asking questions, and a good way to do that is by... Chapters are meant to be transitions. You can use them to introduce new characters, new world building, new plot elements, or even switch up your narrator. Like in Far From the Tree by Robin Benway, the book is told in third-person limited, and it follows the inner worlds of 3 different people, alternating whose inner world we get to see with each new chapter. It makes for a great transition and helps keep the book from getting boring because as soon as things start to wind down with one person, we jump to the next. And that's what chapters are meant to accomplish. That was a bad transition in speaking. When it feels like your characters finally have a moment to breathe, you can put a chapter break and start off the next chapter when things pick back up again. This might be in a different time or place, or it might be when you need to introduce an important piece of world building or a new character. You can put pretty big blank spaces in between chapters to keep your characters through all the boring in-between bits and straight into the action. But you want to be careful because you don't want to get too caught up in the action and you don't want to. It's my favorite word again, consistency. You want your chapters to be consistent. This doesn't mean that every chapter needs to be exactly 10 pages, but you don't want your readers to get accustomed to 3-page chapters only to shock them with a 20-page chapter. You want your readers to say just one more chapter, and this means keeping the chapters tight. This partially means don't make your chapters too long physically. Personally, I find shorter chapters much more palatable. I mean, look at this. It was like 11 at night, and I saw this and said 2 more chapters, and then the next thing I knew, I was almost done with the book and the sun was rising. But I also get that it can be hard to actually write short chapters. You have a lot to accomplish out of a chapter. Maybe the chapter is your character storming the Wizard's Keep and finally getting to the MacGuffin, but on each floor is a nasty magical fight. You could put the storming of the keep in one chapter, but you can split it up because you shouldn't be afraid to. Chapters are nasty little beasts because each chapter needs its own mini hook. It's the one more chapter problem again. They're great places for readers to stop and put your book down, and you want to give them reasons to pick your book back up again. So each chapter needs something to re-grab the reader's attention, which is awful because writing hooks is so hard. We all know it. It was also hard making the video on hooks. So to take a little of the pressure off the start of your chapter, you can use a cliffhanger at the end of the last one. Again, if your characters are in the Wizard's Keep, you can get halfway through storming the keep. I know they're usually referring to as towers. The wizard in my head needed fortification though. Anyway, you can get halfway through the fight and end the chapters when someone gets mortally wounded. That will not only make your readers want to keep reading, but it will create a much easier hook for your next chapter because you're starting with action. And that's another important aspect to writing chapters. Start with action, but don't. Your first draft is meant to be messy. If you've gone through this whole video and now you have no idea how to write your next chapter, it's fine to forget this video. Just come back and rewatch it later. You can break all these rules in your first draft. Have your 20-page chapters, change the narrator in the middle of a chapter, write every chapter with your characters waking up, use words over and over again. That's all fine in the first draft because the most important thing is to get words on paper. You can always come back later and figure out how to make each chapter interesting. And the truth is, you will delete chapters and change them around. I have a Word document on my computer full of outtakes from my stories, and it's about twice as long as my longest story. There are several complete chapters that felt pivotal to the plot at the point that I was writing them, and then I slashed. And when I was working on my second draft of one of my stories, I had to stop and completely rewrite the middle third of the book because I decided the plot would make much more sense if one chapter happened earlier, and that completely changed the whole story. And that's all fine. Writing is messy. Don't be afraid of the mess. You can always come back and clean it up with editing and rewrites later. For now, just focus on getting those chapters out, no matter how messy they are. And don't forget to read and write.